Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, May 29th is set as the date when South Africa's ruling ANC party will face voters for what may be the first real challenge to its domination of the political landscape in the country's 3 decades of democracy. Also, Guinea's ruling junta doubles down on its dissolution of the government by announcing further restrictions, the seizure of ministers' travel documents, freezing of their finances, and removal of cars and staff is announced live on television. No reasons yet been given why. And the Pan-African Film and Arts Festival has been described as a hidden gem of LA's film festival circuit. This year, the film African Glory introduces audiences to a forgotten triumph from the Mandinka emperor who arrived in the Americas 2 centuries before Christopher Colombus. But first, a date's finally been set for South Africa's general election. President Cyril Ramaphosa said that it will be May 29th. Now, it's going to be a particularly tough test for the ruling ANC party as voters' faith has been taxed by frustration over the economy, shoddy services and corruption allegations against its leaders. South Africans vote for a party rather than a presidential candidate. Places in the 400-seat parliament are then allocated according to a party's share of the vote, and MPs then elect the head of state. Since the end of apartheid, that has always been the ANC because of its parliamentary majority. Will that change? Well, Eunice Masson joins us now. She's in Cape Town. Eunice, so May 29th, that's not very long before the election's going to be held. The window that could have been chosen for the election was sometime between May and August. Why do you think Ramaphosa's chosen to hold it earlier rather than later?
Yeah, thank you, Georgia. I think it's really in the best interest of for the ruling ANC government to have the election sooner in May and not August for multiple reasons. There are many independent candidates and new parties joining this year's election, including that of former President Jacob Zuma's MK party. So having the elections in May give these newcomers less time to campaign and attract new voters. And on a more practical point, load shedding in South Africa is usually more frequent during winter months in June, July. So having the election after such a period would not count in the ANC's favor. It really is a race against time for the ruling party, who would want to stay in power and not lose votes to smaller rising political parties. And since the announcement tonight, the responses to having the election in May are positive, especially opposition parties who now have a clear timeline ahead of the elections.
Now, I mentioned a little earlier, Eunice, that a lot of South Africans are running out of patience with the ANC. So what are the stakes for the party here? Is their majority really in jeopardy, do you think?
Well, this year's election comes at a time when the governing party is at its weakest since 1994. The ANC has focused that they have made a lot of changes since 1994, but for the first time in 30 years, the ANC might not receive the votes that it always counted on. The country, like you've mentioned, is experiencing slow economic growth, rolling blackouts, failing service delivery, and high rates of corruption. And the country now might have the chance to change this. Politically, it's also challenging for the ANC at this moment, both internally and externally. As I mentioned, the MK party, which is supported by the former ANC president, poses a real threat to the ANC in terms of not necessarily winning the election, not at all, but stealing much needed votes. We also saw the establishment of the multi-party charter. That is a group of 10 opposition parties that have formed a coalition in the hope to push out the ANC this year.
Thanks very much. Eunice Masson there for us in Cape Town. In other news, Guinea's military junta, which rose to power in a 2021 coup, has dissolved the country's government, saying it will appoint a new administration. Meanwhile, ministers' passports have been seized and their bank accounts frozen. Civil servants have been tasked with running the country's various ministries. The move comes amidst simmering public discontent and even protests over fuel shortages, inflation and power outages. Our team sent us this report from Conakry.
The news has taken many Guineans by surprise. On Monday night, the military regime announced the dissolution of the government. At this cafe in the capital, Mohammed, a civil servant, says he is happy with the decision.
Many of the ministers didn't do what the Guinean population wanted. Every time, they made false promises. It wasn't the fault of President Doumbouya, but of the ministers. That is why we are happy with the decision.
The mood is tense in Guinea. The junta has restricted internet access for the past 3 months. The media has been censored and inflation is rampant. Unions are threatening to launch a general strike. Some politicians believe the dissolution of government could go some way to calming the situation.
Not only does this decision bring relief to the people, but I think it will also bring hope. We need this for the government to rethink and form a new government for the people of Guinea.
Civil society activists continue to call for a return to civilian rule.
As far as the failures of the last 2 years and the alarming situation Guineans find themselves in, what should be done? How can we ensure a speedy transition back to constitutional order? Who is responsible for helping us get away from this abnormal situation?
The junta in Conakry has yet to fix a date for appointing the new government.
Well, for the past 2 weeks, filmmakers and actors have been showcasing their work at the Pan-African Film and Arts Festival in LA. Amongst the films shown this year was African Glory, the story of a Mandinka emperor who sailed to the Americas almost 2 centuries before Christopher Colombus. Our team went along to have a look.
It's a story that's been almost unknown for over 700 years. The story of a Malian emperor who set out to conquer the Atlantic Ocean with a fleet of 2,000 ships. In 1311, Abu Bakari II is said to have left the shores of modern-day Senegal along with some of the region's elite, but the emperor never returned and his story was kept under wraps. It's a secret kept for centuries by the Hunters Brotherhood, whose trust the director had to earn.
That's why it's called African Glory. When Abu Bakr II left, he said, "I won't come back, but my name will return." And that's the mission we have today, to bring this name back to Africa, to restore a little bit of pride.
The expedition took place nearly 2 centuries before Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas. As time went by, evidence appeared that Africans had been there long before slavery, clues that are often ignored by scientists.
Christopher Columbus's discovery marked the beginning of the Renaissance. It's an important date in history. There's a before and after.
We have a responsibility to Africa to show that this continent has a real history, a real science, a real culture that exists and is present.
Those who saw the film at the Pan-African Film Festival in Los Angeles were moved by the story.
My hope is that doesn't get buried again, but we heard it today. And our African history has been vocal.
The film also gave Michael Lonsdale his last role on the big screen. The legendary actor played a mysterious Christopher Columbus in the last years of his life.
And a retrospective of the work of veteran African artist Esther Malungu opens this week in Cape Town before going on an international tour. The exhibition follows the 88-year-old painter and mural artist's unusual trajectory. Without any formal training, her powerful work draws upon her Ndebele heritage and has taken her from rural South Africa to global acclaim. Clarice Fortuné with more.
A helmet, a television, or a skull, all adorned with traditional Ndebele art. But one of the must-see of this new exhibition is this old BMW painted in colorful shapes. All the work of celebrated South African artist Esther Malungu, the 88-year-old painter. Despite having no formal art training, Malungu earned an international reputation with works referencing her Ndebele heritage and using skills passed down for generations.
I feel great about the Ndebele culture because it is important for people to know their roots and where they come from. So it's very important to me.
With just a chicken feather, she first painted mud huts and chipboards before moving on to luxury cars, vodka bottles, and footwear, as her intricate patterns became huge commercial hits. Malangou's first big international break came in 1989, when she was 54. However, South Africa was not quick to recognize Malangou's talent. She gained an international prominence at a time when the art scene in her home country was focused on contemporary styles.
We were taught with curriculums that were looking at majority European artists. And this was frustrating for me going into the industry because I realized that I really did not have a great footing into knowing what is around me.
Today, South Africa recognizes its own. After Cape Town, the exhibition will move to Johannesburg before departing for the United States and beyond.
She's so amazing. That, though, is all we have time for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, though. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.